All right, here's the second PowerPoint. I'm going to talk about specifically how to write good objectives here. Quick overview. Objectives can be categorized in different ways, and you've got to figure out exactly what your intent is as to which type of outcome or objective you're using. There are institutional objectives, program objectives, and course objectives, and they may overlap, they may be similar, and they're driven by different things. So at the institutional level, let's use CSN for an example. The institution is CSN. CSN has a mission statement, a vision statement. It has goals and objectives for each individual student, but also for the university, the college as a whole. That was a Freudian slip. Anyway, those are almost always associated with accreditation standards or some other program that we're involved with. For example, we have recently become accredited or certified as an Hispanic serving school. And there are not too many colleges around the country that have this seal of approval. But we had to attain certain goals in order to get that, to be certified in such a manner. So those became part of our institutional objectives. Program objectives would be more like the objectives for the respiratory therapy program, the CRS program. And the program objectives, the bottom line is we'll teach you to be a respiratory therapist and you'll pass your tests at the end, also that you'll get licensed. So there are program objectives, and sometimes those are driven by accreditation. So the accreditation agency might say that 50% of your people must pass the written registry on the first attempt. That's now, it goes from being an accreditation standard to one of the program objectives, because if you don't meet that objective, you can lose your accreditation. We also will look at the local labor market to see what program objectives should be and different trends, and the same with course objectives. So institutional objectives, as I said, they are often associated with accreditation or with other programs that the college or university is dependent on. But if you don't have those, you can do what's called an environmental scan. And with that, you look at the learner, who is learning. If you are teaching high school students, you teach those kids differently than you do adult learners. If you're teaching adult learners who learn how to read at a later age, you teach them differently than people who have been reading the language in question, English in our case, from an early age. If they are not English language speakers, English is not their first language, then that would affect their characteristics. So you look at different characteristics like that. There are labor market issues. If you look around and you see that there is a job market available that is untapped, then that's a great place for you to set up a program and start creating students. If you have, conversely, a job market in a certain area where the market's just flooded with graduates, then you may want to pull back and spend your resources elsewhere training students to do a different job. Then there are trends, and those are like anything else. They come and go, and they're popular at the time. Some of them are useful and some of them aren't. The mode of delivery may also be affiliated with the institutional objective. For example, at CSN, they may say we will deliver a certain percentage of our courses via distance education, online education. Or we will enroll 30% of our students in such a course. That could be an institutional objective. That, again, may be affiliated with the accreditation. It may be a standard that the Board of Regents, who are our governing board, has set for us. There are different things, but the mode of delivery may affect the institutional objective. Program objectives, again, may be affiliated with the college, because if the college says 50% of our students will get a degree within 2 years, and our program is a 3-year program. If you look at it very closely, it's a 3-year program. It's not really possible to get through the CRS program in less than 3 years, which means immediately it fails the objective. So then the college has to look back at it and say, well, do we want to get rid of the CRS program or what? In our case, because we're a strong program that's good for the community and good for the college, it's easier for the college to say, we want 75% of all of our different programs to graduate at least 50% of their people within 2 years. That's an attainable objective. But they kind of threw the CRS program out the window and said, well, we just won't rely on you for this. We'll rely on 75% of the programs at the college. You're just not one of them. So there are different ways you can work around these things. There's always a workaround. You may look at the environmental scan, and again, that goes back to the job market primarily to see, and also your students, who are you serving and why are you serving them. You do have to look at articulation agreements. Before we could send you out to a clinical site, the college had to have an affiliation agreement with that hospital. We had to say, these are our responsibilities and these are the hospital's responsibilities towards students, and it's a legal agreement. If you fall down and get hurt, or if someone goes postal in the hospital and starts murdering victims, and you happen to be one of them, who will be held liable for this? So an articulation agreement just lines out with two organizations who will be responsible for which things. Then, of course, you have to look at different methods in the program to assess your students. There are didactic courses, which is what you're taking now, lab courses, and then externship or clinical courses in our case. And you will use different assessment methods to determine whether the objectives were met differently in different types of courses. There used to be, I don't even know if you can still do it anymore, but there used to be a correspondence school for respiratory therapy. It was California College. Ask around, people will tell you about California College. And then they changed their name because they got such a bad rap, but everybody knew it was still California College. So you could actually take a correspondence course to become a respiratory therapist. But in doing so, and no one could ever figure out how they got around this, they didn't have any labs. I mean, think about it. You got a book, and someone's showing you pictures of how to use a ventilator, but you don't actually touch a ventilator. You don't have one laying around your living room. So if you're teaching yourself, how do you do that? And so their excuse was, well, we'll send you to clinical, but of course you had to find your own clinical site if you were the student, and you had to get your own affiliation agreements signed. It was a big mess. But then California College was saying, we don't have to provide a lab because your clinical site, who is most likely will become your future employer, they'll teach you how to use whatever ventilators they have laying around, because they do have ventilators in their living rooms. And so there was always this mystery as to how they got away with the laboratory course requirement, which is a requirement per COARC for our accreditation standards. But there's all these differences that are out there, and you have to figure out what's important and what's not. So in workforce education, which is what we are considered, that's basically vocational education, the old vocational training. It's for a job in the workplace. They're almost always associate degrees, by the way, or an equivalent amount of education, 1.5 to 2 years worth of education. They teach you a set of skills so you can go out and get a job. The public need is extremely important. If you don't need any respiratory therapists in the community, but we train 100 of them anyway, where are those 100 people going to get a job? Course objectives are what we have basically been talking about, and it's where I'm going to have you spend most of your time. I just wanted to make sure you understood that there are objectives at different levels. Well, there are objectives all over the place. Anyway, course objectives may go back to accreditation standards once again. They may also be related to licensing or testing later on. If the MBRC says you're going to have to know how to put a cannula on, even if COARC doesn't say learning how to put a cannula on is an objective, if the MBRC is testing you on it, it is now an objective. So the course objectives should definitely be relevant to what is going on. They need to meet certain criteria, and that's what we were talking about in the last PowerPoint presentation, where it said each objective must have certain components, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. And then you have to make sure that they're useful. Don't just write an objective for the sake of writing an objective. I have seen people's syllabi for a course that had 500 objectives on it. Well, dozens more than it actually needed. If you can boil it down to 5 or 6 objectives, then do. The other stuff, it's just fodder. And if you're trying to blow smoke, as Dr. Paul Meacham used to tell me, and at one point he was the president of CSN, and then he went to work at UNLV, and he's a super interesting man. See, right now I would take a moment to tell you about Dr. Meacham, an amazing man, but every class I ever took from him, he would start off by saying, "Don't blow smoke, we can all see through it." So don't just write for the sake of making your paper longer. There are different types of instruction. There's mass instruction, small group instruction, direct experience, and individualized instruction. And sometimes these things overlap. The mass instruction is really popular right now. If you don't know what a MOOC is, MOOC, now's the time to look that up because it's pretty interesting, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. But major institutions, I'm talking MIT, Yale, Stanford, Harvard, it also just plain Jane, you and me, we could set up these classes. We could put them on different websites like Coursera or course sites for that matter, and open it up to the public. And anybody who wanted to sign up for it, I could make this class that you're taking right now, because it's on course sites, I could make it available to the general public. I could make it free, or I could charge them however much money I thought somebody would pay for the course. Now, would it really be ethical of me at this point? No, not at all, which is why I'm not doing it. But there's this education out there that is free or nearly free, and you end up taking a class with literally thousands of people from across the world, across the globe, sitting in the same classroom. Obviously, one teacher can't teach all that, and you have to be really motivated. And on the one hand, it's pretty cool because you can take a class in anything you could dream of, anything you wanted from almost any institution you've ever known. You can take those classes. Now, is it worth getting legitimate college credit for? And that's where the question comes in. Because the teacher doesn't grade 1,000 papers. I have enough trouble grading 9 of your papers. I can't imagine trying to grade 1,000, and I'm talking literally 1,000 papers. So the students wind up assessing each other. Now, does that mean they learn everything they need to learn? Probably not. But massive online courses, or MOOCs, that's where we're sitting right now. So you're actually learning about this at a good time, because MOOCs are relatively new. And there's a lot of discussion going on at colleges and universities around the country about whether these are useful and if this is the way education should move. There's small group instruction, which is closer to the classroom size. That's what you guys are doing. You're in what we would consider small group instruction. There's direct experience and individualized instruction, and sometimes those go hand in hand. For example, in the clinical site, those could be the same. So direct experience is you're actually there and you're doing something on the job. You may be alone. You may be the only person at that clinical site, or there may be several of you there. And if there are several of you there, we still could split you up and send you each to a different area. So it's still individualized instruction, even if you're receiving direct experience. So there's some overlap in some of these. We talked about learning contracts last time, and here's some more. It's basically the same thing, and it's in here twice because it is really useful. Some of you, depending on when you graduated from the CRS program, may have signed a learning contract. And it does kind of put an obligation, it wraps this obligation like a weight around your neck. I will take all of my MBRC exams within 6 weeks of graduation, in some cases what it said. And it's something to consider. So when you're working with adults, it really does put the onus on the learner to accomplish more on their own. But you do have to have certain criteria, and here's a list of them. That's my cat running around with a bell in the back. It's not actually a bell, it's his tag. I don't know what to do. He's really excited tonight. Okay, when you write objectives, remember before there was a list on the other PowerPoint that said each objective must have 4 criteria. Here they are. It has to have the audience, the behavior, the conditions, the degree. These are the 4 things. Now, I said you can kind of get away with doing 3, and that's because the audience, you can usually use the phrase, the learner will, as you see there in yellow, the learner will. Well, now you've really dictated that the audience is the learner. You could also say the student will. That's your audience. So most of the time the audience doesn't change. If it's a patient, you can say the patient will. You know, you leave that, the group will, whatever. The audience is right there. So you often don't have to think too much about that first criteria. The others, the behavior, condition, and degree, this is where you guys were having a little trouble when I was grading your papers before, and I know you can do better now that you've seen this here. So let me go over these. The audience, again, that's just the learner. So the learner will, it's usually at the beginning of an objective, but not necessarily, as long as somewhere in the sentence, in the objective sentence, the audience is named, whoever that might be. Then the behavior, that's exactly what you expect the learner to do. I expect you to be able to place a cannula on someone's face. So you got to be fairly specific, not just place a cannula on a patient. I'll say place a cannula on their face, because saying place a cannula on a patient, you know, where's it going to end up? Around their waist, wrapped around their foot? You know, let's be specific. The conditions that's the situation in which you expect the student to accomplish this. I expect the student to put a cannula on a mannequin's face during the lab period or under the supervision of an instructor during lab or during a competency. Those are the conditions. The degree is how you grade them, basically. I expect them to put a cannula on the face of the mannequin during the lab period correctly 75% of the time. Actually, I wouldn't even say that. I would say 100% of the time because it's a cannula, but you know what I mean. There are different types of objectives. This is back to Bloom's taxonomy. Again, this is a repeat from your last PowerPoint. So it's here for a reason, because these are really important things. These different levels, the knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, and synthesis, and evaluation, those are, because depending on the level you're working with, it makes a difference in how you will write your objective. There are domains of learning, that's cognitive, psychomotor, and affective, which I talked about before and ad nauseum. You guys ought to be pretty sick of seeing this now. But know that cognitive is the way you think, psychomotor is the way you act, that's usually the physical act, and affective is how you feel about it. To me, writing affective objectives has always been the toughest. I think people who are the touchy-feely kind, they probably don't have any problem with that at all, but I have trouble with that, and I'm not very good at it. And fortunately, in my profession, I don't have to use that often. All right, here are some examples of objectives that are well written and at different levels. So we're going back to Bloom's taxonomy. The lowest level is knowledge. That's generally just recall. So following instruction, the learner will recall the appropriate percentage of oxygen in room air with 100% accuracy. And I could add to that and say with 100% accuracy 5 times in a row, or with 100% accuracy 2 weeks from now. I can make that even more specific if I wanted to. Comprehension, a little bit higher on Bloom's taxonomy. So you've got the knowledge, now we're beginning to look at what you can do with it. Following instruction, the learner will describe the difference between PEEP and pressure support with 90% accuracy. Again, I could go back and say 90% accuracy 2 weeks after the lesson. Application. The learner would demonstrate the proper way to place 3 oxygen delivery devices on a patient one at a time with no errors at the end of 1 laboratory period. So at that point, we're saying you've got some knowledge, what can you do with it? I'm going to give you 3 different things, and I'm going to make sure you can use all 3 things with no errors. And see, that's the same as 100% accuracy, it's just written in a different way. And I've also said you have to do this at the end of 1 lab period. Leveling up here, we have analysis. The learner will group 5 oxygen administration devices in order of potential from the lowest to highest oxygen delivery content with a margin of error of 1 or less device out of sequence at the end of 1 laboratory period. So the bottom line is I'm going to give you 5 things, 5 different oxygen delivery devices. I'm going to say put them in order of lowest oxygen delivery to highest oxygen delivery, and I'm going to make sure that if you get 1 item out of sync, then that's it. You get a margin of 1 mistake out of 5. And if you think about it, that's still 80% accuracy. If you said you could have 2 mistakes out of 5, think about that. That would be a failing grade. That would be 60% of the time you're correct. So when you write this, if you've got a small number of tasks, in this case you have 5 oxygen delivery devices, you want to make sure that the margin of error gets smaller with the number of tasks you have. Synthesis. The learner will create a ventilator circuit with no leaks from a set of provided materials for a Puritan Bennett 840 ventilator. So in this case, you have to know what a ventilator is. You have to know what a vent circuit is. You have to know what the pieces are. You have to know how to put the pieces together. You have to recognize whether you have all the pieces. And when you put it together, it has to function and not have any leaks. See, no leaks in that case is 100% accuracy, right? So I didn't have to specifically say with 100% accuracy because I said with no leaks. You will create the ventilator circuit with no leaks. I didn't give you any room to make a mistake there. Evaluation. This is where you look at everything together, use all the other pieces of information to make a value judgment. In this case, given 2 ventilators, the learner would determine which of the 2 is most appropriate for an adult trauma victim, listing 3 reasons. So now I've said you've got to list at least 3 reasons. So if you're only capable of listing 2, you fail. If you list more than 3, it's fine. You pass. You can't more than pass. But if you list less than 3, it's a fail. And here are my references, a couple of the books I used in doing this. But I hope this helps. And now we're going to write better objectives. Yay!